Broadly, the idea is that Facebook is handing over decision-making authority, or at least some decision-making authority, over what shows up in your Facebook or Instagram newsfeed, turning it over to this independent body whose judgment will be binding. Kate Klonick, the legal scholar who's been closely following these efforts from the start, points out that, quote, this is the first time a private transnational company has voluntarily assigned a part of its policies to an external body like this. And keep in mind, Facebook is not just any company. The Facebook company owns Facebook, the product that you see on your phone. They own Instagram, they own WhatsApp, and as of last week, they now own Giphy. These products are used by over 3 billion people around the world. For them to give up any control whatsoever is a big deal. That said, the announcement has been met with a deluge of opinions, and not all of them favorable, to say the least. Kara Swisher said their task is like, quote, trying to push back the ocean with one hand, unquote. And I will say that is one of the far more generous criticisms. There is skepticism, there is cynicism, and there is downright hostility towards even the concept of the Oversight Board. One Facebook critic who I know emailed me to say I should just cancel this very session altogether, as it, quote, creates the illusion of progress where none exists, unquote. Anyway, you get the idea, and we're going to get all into that during this hour. But first, who are the Oversight Board and what do they do? They are objectively a very impressive group from all over the world. They include free expression advocates, very noteworthy law professors, famous journalists, a Nobel laureate, even a former prime minister. We are very lucky to have 4 of the 20 with us today, including 2 of the 4 chairs. They are Jamal Greene, who is a chair. He's the Dwight Professor of Law at Columbia Law School. The second chair is Michael McConnell. He is director of the Stanford Constitutional Law Center. Also with us is Evelyn Aswad, director of the Center of International Business and Human Rights at the University of Oklahoma College of Law. And finally, John Samples, vice president, Center for Representative Government at the Cato Institute. As we begin to bring them on, let me just tell you a little bit about what to expect from this hour. We're going to do this in 3 parts. The first part is I'm going to ask them some questions that is purely just about fact-finding about the board. I'm going to ask them to explain to us exactly how this works. After that, I'm going to ask them some questions that represent some of the criticisms that I've seen and some of the questions I have. And then the last part, hopefully a good half hour or so, will be questions from you. So let me explain how you do that. If you look at your screen right now, you see at the bottom the Q&A button. Just click on that, and anytime starting right now, you can begin to enter your questions. I would ask you, please, if you feel comfortable doing so, to please add your name and your affiliation and where you're coming to us from. It's not mandatory, but it's really great context to know who you are and, again, what your affiliation is. So again, you can do that anytime over the course from now till 4 o'clock Eastern time. And the very last things before we get started, one, I want to disclose that Facebook is a general operating funder of Aspen Digital. They, along with other companies and foundations, they are not the only ones. But please know that they have not reviewed any of these questions or the format or any element whatsoever of this session. It is completely independent. And then lastly, this is technology. It fails. I can't promise you somebody's sound won't go off. I can't promise you we'll lose picture. It happens. Just bear with us. So with that, welcome. Thank you so much for the 4 of you to join us. I can't tell you how happy we are to have you and to hear from you. So I'm just going to jump right in again with some of the questions about how this works. I'm going to start with our 2 chairs. Jamal, I'll turn to you, please. Talk to us about exactly what kind of issues the Oversight Board has the authority to direct.
Sure, and thank you, Vivian, and I'm glad to be here, and thanks for everyone who's tuning in. The Oversight Board is a final decision maker on various issues that arise on Facebook and Instagram that go through Facebook's own content moderation system. And then when they're particularly difficult or controversial or raise issues that might extend beyond the case itself, they can be appealed either by users or by Facebook to the oversight board. We can then make binding decisions on that content. In the course of doing so, we can also give some advice to Facebook about how it constructs its content moderation policies. The decisions themselves will be grounded both in Facebook's own community standards and its values, and in values of international human rights.
So as I understand it, and correct me, Jamal, if I'm wrong, but your decision-making authority is specifically about reinstating content that has been taken down by Facebook and has been appealed and rejected. And then you guys will adjudicate those decisions and may make a decision to reinstate that content. Is that right? But it's not, your authority does not extend, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, to content that is up that you recommend should go away.
So the authority of the board when it comes to the charter and the bylaws of the board does extend to both appeals of content that has been removed by Facebook and that someone wants to reinstate, as well as content that stays up that someone wants to remove. At the moment of launch, which will be sometime in the next few months, we hope, at the moment of launch, we won't be handling cases that are cases of content that is staying up that someone wants to remove. And there are some technical and privacy-related issues that make that more complicated, but it's anticipated by the board, by Facebook, by everyone, that will come within our scope as soon as we can.
Thank you. John, can you talk to us, sorry, not John, Michael, who is our other chair on the call. Can you talk to us about what decisions, some of the decisions of the oversight board are binding? Facebook has, I think, a matter of days once you make a determination to take an action. And other decisions that you make are guidance for Facebook that they can choose to follow or not. Can you explain what parts of your work are binding and what is basically advisory? Oh, you're muted.
Sure, and I wanted to emphasize, building on what Jamal was saying, that we are not frontline, internet cops. We're not the ones who are monitoring what's up and just making, rapid fire decisions about leaving stuff up or taking it down. We are a deliberative second look at the end of the process, a kind of an appeal, if you will. And the advantage of this is that it will be more deliberative and also more transparent, because we're going to be able to give reasons for what we do. And then the hope is that these reasons will carry precedential weight as the online enforcers continue. So they will take these decisions as instructions for how to deal with similar cases. We have binding authority over the individual cases that come to us. These will be users whose content is taken down. They appeal within Facebook. They're still not satisfied. They come to us. Those individual case decisions will be binding. Similarly, as Jamal says, we hope soon, we do not really know because it's a technical issue, the symmetrical cases involving objections to material left up will also be binding. But in addition to this, Facebook, the company, will be referring questions of policy to us, getting our guidance, and that will not be binding. We will give our advice. Facebook is obligated to react to it, to respond to it publicly, so that they will say whether they agree with it or not. The whole system will be, far more transparent than what it is today. But that those will be advisory opinions, not binding opinions.
So, just if I understand correctly, the only thing, at least initially, that is binding is the decision that you might make to either reinstate or agree with Facebook to leave out a piece of content that has been appealed. Everything else
Right, in
is
a
advised.
specific, that's right.
In a specific case, right. And can you say a little bit more about precedent? Who is going to be making the decisions? If you make a decision about an individual piece of content, and let's consider that billions of pieces of content are flying around Facebook properties as we speak, who will make the decisions about what other pieces of content map to the precedent you make, the decision you make about a precedential piece of content?
This will simply become part of the training process for, tens of thousands of human beings who are employed by Facebook. I didn't realize how many there were. There are literally tens of thousands at 3 different locations around the globe who make split-second decisions about this, and our decisions will be added to the training, to the standards that they're supposed to apply.
So I'm gonna pick up on that theme. Thank you, of split-second decisions. Evelyn, I'm going to turn this one over to you. As I understand it, even after somebody requests that a piece of content that's been taken down be reinstated, they appeal. Facebook still says no. Then it can go to you. You choose what cases you're going to take, and then you have 90 days to make your determination about that piece of content. I believe that's correct. You can tell me in a second if I've got that wrong. What about something more urgent? We live in a time of global emergency.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having us on your program, Vivian. It's great to be here. And yes, you're correct. Generally, when a user appeals, we will need to render our decision within that 90-day window that you mentioned. Now, for a more urgent situation, Facebook will be able to refer a matter to us in what's called our expedited review procedure. And in that case, we will have to render a decision within 30 days. So in 1/3 the time we usually would render a decision. Now that too is not overnight, but I think the point of our board is to look at these issues that are going to be so impactful and so controversial in a much more thoughtful manner than otherwise is anyone can give to these issues.
John, some of the more controversial, especially in this election year, especially in the United States, and let's remember this board is global, so we're not just taking U.S. issues. We happen to have 4 U.S. Representatives of the board on this program today, mostly for time zone reasons. But John, some of the more controversial content that is either allowed or not allowed on content are ads. And again, just a reminder to everybody, I know you all understand this. An ad on Facebook is basically any post that any individual, it could be a company, it can be a person, has paid to be amplified. And they pay to amplify that content to a specific type of person. When you pay to have your content amplified, again, I'm saying this for the audience's purpose not so much for yours, John, you can choose who that ad is targeted at. It can be men between the age of 18 to 24 that live in a rural community who love Game of Thrones. I don't know, I'm making that up. So there is a lot of controversy about those ads, particularly from campaigns, and including from others. Will those ads that are such a source of controversy, will those be part of the remit of the Oversight Board? If an ad is taken down, for example, will that be part of the cases that you can hear?
So you described the business model for Facebook in general. It's an advertising model. A small part of it, at the end of the day, involves political ads. My understanding is, well, first let me say that we had some discussions, or there were some public discussions that included Facebook, about the advertising policy at the end of last year and early this year. And they have a policy about ads that come directly from campaigns. That policy exists. My understanding is that about the content of other ads, or maybe ads in general too, will be within the remit of the board, the content of them or decisions about them. But it's a complicated matter, you see, because they already have a policy and that they're carrying out with regard to the campaigns. And whether that will show up and they'll ask for advice about that is not something that I can predict, or anyone. I would mention also that because of a number of reasons, but the difficulties of getting together and so on. We don't expect decisions really to start coming down until September probably, and maybe even later than that, as complications have been difficult. But that's right now the target. So you can see that with regard to the election, it'll be roughly in that range, but certainly won't include the entire election season.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly not in time to have much of an impact in terms of precedent for the election. I want to ask you, the members, about the terms of your arrangement with Facebook. Are you being paid, first of all, is a question I will throw out to Michael, to you. Are the members of the Oversight Board and the chairs being paid for this work?
Yes.
Yeah. How much are you being paid?
Well, the individual amounts are not public information, but in general, it's simply to compensate us for alternative uses of our time.
I see. And what, and I assume that you, for the chairs, will probably be putting more time into this than the members. What percentage of your time do you think roughly you would expect to be engaged on this? I realize you've been doing a lot of these kind of talks for the last 2 weeks. That won't last forever.
I have serious fears it's going to eat up my life. I think the original was that it's going to be on the order of 15 to 20 hours a month. I'm skeptical, and my wife is even more skeptical.
Okay. And Jamal, what were you promised by Facebook in terms of the autonomy of the board? Is there anything that you asked for? And I would say this, any of the four of you, is there anything that you asked for in terms of specific conditions of your autonomy that was that you asked for that was not accepted?
No, and we're not just relying on Facebook's oral promises. There is a trust that's been set up that governs our operations, and Facebook doesn't have power to remove us. We'll be selecting our own members after the full board is constituted, which will be 40 members. After that point, it's entirely autonomous who is a member of the board. And Facebook doesn't directly compensate us and can't reduce our compensation. So there are actual guarantees of independence written into the contracts. And in our conversations, in all of my conversations with people on the Facebook side, that's been entirely consistent with my conversations with them. And my sense is that they want us to be independent. That's why the board has been set up. And you're right to suggest that's a condition of my joining the board, and I know that's true of other members as well. But I've seen no reason to doubt that commitment at this stage.
And as you can see, I'm moving into more some of the challenges that have bubbled up over the course of promotion around the Oversight Board. I'll staying with you, Jamal. Margaret Sullivan in her Washington Post column last week floated the idea. She said, quote, "The whole effort may serve a troubling purpose to cover up the need for meaningful reform with a high-priced fig leaf." John Naughton in The Guardian said something similar, that by joining the group, you are effectively endorsing Facebook. How do you respond to that? Evelyn, I'll direct that one to you. It's not so, the question is not, I'm not questioning your independence and your integrity, let me just say. Maybe others are, I certainly am not. But by virtue of the very existence of the Oversight Board, is it not an endorsement of Facebook? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I don't think any of us would have taken the position if we thought we were somehow providing cover for Facebook. For me personally, I've been out there writing articles concerned about content moderation by Facebook and other social media companies. I've been speaking out at conferences. I've been doing everything a professor can do on these issues. And for me, serving on the board is a continuation of being able to voice those concerns, but perhaps in a forum that will be more impactful. And, as you know, all of our decisions and our recommendations will be made public, and Facebook's reactions will be made public. And this will allow for a lot of public scrutiny that right now isn't happening about content moderation. So that's kind of how I see it.
Do you feel, Evelyn, given that you obviously, at least to start, your jurisdiction over what decision-making authority you have is fairly narrow to start. Do you feel that as regards the entirety of Facebook and all of their properties, do you feel constrained to comment or potentially criticize parts of the business or their decision-making that are outside of your remit?
You know, personally, I don't. I think we'll be able to criticize and provide recommendations through our recommendations function. And I also think in our individual writings, we'll be able to continue to write and speak our minds.
And you feel that you will.
Yeah.
John, let's come back to you. Joan Donovan from Harvard's Kennedy Shorenstein Center at the Kennedy School made this observation, quote, "They're going forward with this really drawn out procedural mechanism that doesn't address what the problem is, which is that viral content only needs to be on the internet for 4 to 8 hours for it to do its damage." Now, I understand, and Michael made the very important point that the 20 of you cannot be the front line of Facebook. That said, so much of the damaging content from Facebook, and we'll talk about other platforms in a second, can lead to damage quite quickly. And yet, the long drawn out decision-making around of individual pieces of content and the precedent obviously is out of sync with that timeline. Does this concern you?
So I would say that in a sense, there's two different elements to an answer. One is if you look at, well, what we're charged with is making decisions according to the Facebook community standards and Facebook's values. Now, Facebook's community standards are an attempt to deal with content that is harmful. That seems to be the central rule of it. It's a kind of harm principle applied to a set of rules. The rules are laid out extensively. They've been public for several years. However, the first line of application of those rules, as Michael McConnell mentioned, is the content moderators, of whom there are 30 or 40,000 throughout the world, and they're trained to deal with that. Our job is not really that. Our job is to provide a sense that there is a legitimate, that process itself is legitimate because there's an appeals process, and we are that appeals process. So if you think your material is taken down unfairly or it doesn't meet the standard of violating community standards, you have an appeal to us. And I will say, I would think the question of proceduralism actually applies to a couple of questions here. I was reading the bylaws and the charter of the board this morning, and what struck me again was how much effort and time had been put into these procedures. But you know, we live in a society, and it's a lot of the history and tradition of the society is that instead of trying to fight over things directly, we set up procedures. We allow procedures for fairness of decisions. And that seems to me to be, in this sense, what Facebook now departed from the scene of the Oversight Board, what Facebook has tried to do, set up procedures that force deliberation in many ways from the Oversight Board and can convince people ultimately, because there are procedural protections, that these are going to be fair decisions, that there are appeals from what Facebook is doing, and that those appeals can be considered fairly and across the board. This is not a few people deciding, and ultimately, because of those procedures, the entire board has to be on board for decisions. So I think the proceduralism in the job we can do is not content moderation, but rather appeals for content moderation. I think the procedures actually should give people confidence.
It does strike me that there is a chasm perhaps between the frontline reviewers who are looking at content, sometimes ugly content. There's a whole other issue about taking care of the mental health of those reviewers, and your deliberative body that is setting precedent and purposely you're embracing this as a benefit. Deliberate decisions that set long-term precedent. There's this precedent. There's a huge space in the middle for what we might call sort of the real world day-to-day process that I think many people have criticized Facebook as being lacking. Michael, I'll turn this question over to you related to what I just said. There are, when you look at what people criticize Facebook for, yes, there are issues about free expression, which is a lot of what, a lot of the issues you're going to be taking on. But again, we brought up earlier advertising, particularly political advertising, harassment attacks, data collection, the kind of data or what some might call surveillance capitalism model of Facebook, whereby data is collected and it is not necessarily clear to the user how that data is being used. Or what we saw in 2016 around influence campaigns, coordinated disinformation campaigns, like we saw from the Russian Institute for Research in St. Petersburg. Those issues seem to be not necessarily in your remit, and admittedly, it's a lot. What gives you comfort that those issues are going to be addressed?
There are any number of problems with Facebook and other social media, just as there are any number of problems with universities, with automobile manufacturers, with government. Every institution, provides, I hope, some value. Certainly, I think Facebook provides value, but they're producing a host of problems as well. Our job is not to solve all those problems. Our job is quite specific, and I hope that it makes the world a better place. It's an experiment, we don't know, but it's tackling one aspect of part of the problem, and that aspect is the widespread sense of many people in the world that decisions about what are taken down and left up have been arbitrary, unexplained, inconsistent, possibly biased. That is the part of the problem that I hope we can do something about by doing our level best to introduce consistency, to provide reasons, to introduce some transparency. We are not going to solve the problem of virality on the internet. We're not going to solve the problem of how of privacy and data collection on the internet. If we can make a small improvement with respect to one problem that has been assigned to us, I think we will have spent our time wisely.
Well, the world will certainly be watching for the outcome of that first decision. One last question for me, and then we're going to go to the audience questions. Jamal, Facebook, obviously, as broad and as it is, and as influential as it is only one part, of course, of the overall information ecosystem. In a world where we have the President of the United States tweeting falsehoods, and we have other platforms where YouTube, for example, where there is problems with widespread propagation of anti-vaxxer information, et cetera. How do you feel that with your aspiration to have an impact on what the world sees, how do you see your work with on Facebook fitting into that larger ecosystem?
So I'll start by just associating myself with what Michael just said about what the capacity and aspiration of the board is at this stage, which is we have a remit that involves an appeals process after content goes through a moderation process at Facebook and at Instagram. There are, of course, the world of social media is much larger than that and includes lots of other companies and lots of other platforms that are all making their own decisions about this. I guess I'd add an addendum to whether we've done a good job, the measure of whether our work has been done wisely, if others are paying attention to what we're doing and learning lessons from it. That I think it would be valuable. Whether this particular model is the right model for other platforms, it's completely premature to answer that kind of question. We haven't even started hearing cases yet, but hopefully it can offer some valuable lessons and we can learn something.
It'll be interesting to see if others follow suit with this model. I'm sure they're looking carefully at what the response has been and how your first decisions will be made. We're going to go to questions now from everybody watching. Reminder, the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, click there. Please add your name and affiliation. If you can, it's really helpful and where you're coming from. We're going to get through as many as we can. So I'm going to jump right in. This first question is from Ellen McGirt. She's editor at Fortune and founder of the Race Ahead newsletter. Her question is, I'm assuming you all spent time, this is her question to you. I'm assuming you all spent time exploring issues on the Facebook platform before you took the role. What have any of the board members learned about the extent of hate or propaganda speech currently on the platform? What makes you confident that this work will have the intended impact? John, I'm going to direct that one to you.
So the thing I know, I learned from a man named Josh Tucker at New York University, who exclusively studies this. He has a center there at NYU. I've been going to a series of seminars and lectures at other places, Stanford Law, and he talked about the sheer numbers, the actual proportionally, given all speech and given that you have 3 billion people using this platform, the amount of hate speech is actually quite low proportionally. However, the actual effect can be very bad, and so it comes under regulation in the Facebook community standards. Beyond that, I think there's other social science research that has been done on this. I don't know all of it. I think it will inform the work that has been done both here and elsewhere on social media. But I think one has to have an open mind about these questions in the sense about learning more about effects, about everything, and not just about hate speech.
Evelyn, this next question I'll direct at you. This is from Paul Barrett, who is Josh Tucker's colleague at NYU Stern School of Business and Human Rights. Do you expect Facebook's practice of outsourcing do you expect to examine, Facebook's practice of outsourcing the vast majority of its human content moderation to third-party vendors? So just to be clear, this is now not the question to the audience. Most of those people, and there are tens of thousands of them, maybe hundreds of thousands of them all over the world, are not employees of Facebook. They work for companies that are essentially vendors. Do you expect that's something that you'll look at?
So it's not directly going to come before us in terms of a decision of whether a particular piece of content stays up or must come down. That said, I think our recommendations could span quite a few topics, and it could come up in the form of a recommendation.
So do you, this is just a follow-up from me now, let's use this one as an example, and of course there are thousands of others. In addition to looking at the cases that come before you about reinstating content, would you expect in this first year to be doing that kind of reaching in as opposed to responding and looking at issues like this and saying, hey, Facebook, this is the recommendation of the Oversight Board. Do you expect that will happen in say the first year or so?
It's hard to predict the future, but if you're asking my personal opinion, I do think there could be recommendations that go beyond the actual decisions within the first year. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there will be obviously a lot of people looking for that. I don't know if the chairs have any other comment on that. Michael, you're unmuted, so I'll throw that to you. Do you expect to sort of do that kind of reaching in to make recommendations in the first year?
Well, of course, I don't know, what my fellow board members are going to think about any individual matter, but I would be very surprised if we do not have something to say about broader institutional and policy questions that go, beyond the boundaries of any individual case.
Yeah, I mean, there's a related question that comes. I'll just stay with you, Michael, from somebody in the audience. This is Alex Heath. He's a reporter for The Information. He says there's been mention of the Oversight Board extending its mandate eventually. What other areas of Facebook does anyone on this call hope to offer input rulings on beyond content takedowns. So again, or actually, I think content reinstatements is what your mandate is, not so much content takedowns. Just, look, you are, you've only just been announced for the last, 2 weeks ago, but yet you've obviously been examining Facebook. You must have thoughts about what are areas that you think, other areas you think you would want to address beyond the initial remit of reinstating content.
Well, I see our scope here as having to do with content in general, whether take down or stay up eventually. And as Jamal explained, it's really only a technical reason why in the short term at the launch, we'll be hearing appeals only of one sort. So beyond the realm of content moderation, it is my view. I hope we do a good job of this. That's what I'm focused on. And there are other things out there that we might be assigned or in the future. I'm really just not even thinking about it.
I just want to pick up on that word you just used, assigned. You're making your own assignments, though, right? You're not awaiting assignment from Facebook in order to make recommendations. Is that the case?
Well, our charter comes from Facebook. It is Facebook that has made the public pledge to defer to our decisions, to implement our decisions in a particular realm. We don't have the authority to go to Mark Zuckerberg and say, hey, Mr. Zuckerberg, we've decided we want to start looking at your employment discrimination practices or something else. We stick. Our charter can be changed, but in the meantime, that it sets our amendments.
So there's a lot of the questions are sort of in a similar vein. So let me just ask this specific one. I'll direct it to you, Jamal. This is from Mark Ginsburg. He comes to us from Washington, D.C.'s president of the Coalition for a Safer Web. He writes, Facebook pledged to remove COVID-related misinformation content, yet we have found and continue to find hundreds of re-uploaded copies of Plandemic in many languages, some of which are accompanied by ads indicating that Facebook is profiting. Again, this is his words. How would the board address this shortcoming? I think I will just add on to that. You don't need to, well, I'm just going to leave it. I'm just going to leave it there.
So I'll interpret that question in a couple of different ways. One might be as to the specifics of COVID. The other having to do with essentially auditing once if a decision has been made, whether Facebook is honoring commitments that it's made. As to COVID itself, it's conceivable that issues relating to that could come before the board. I don't know whether they will or not, but I'd rather not talk about the specific case. But in general, the problem of Facebook, whether Facebook is in fact able to implement its own policy decisions, is not something that the board itself. So if Facebook is itself committed to a certain policy and is just doing a bad job as a matter of engineering or as a matter of human content moderation or as a matter of how its algorithms work, that's not something that the board has the capacity to address. It may well be that in a particular case, a deluge of cases arise that raise policy issues or implementation issues around which the board might be able to make some recommendations. But I'll just reemphasize that at this stage, we have to crawl before we can walk and walk before we can run. And right now, that means what is already an enormously complex process of trying to deal with individual pieces of content and making some broader recommendations that are informed by decisions made around those individual pieces. What else we might be able to do is going to have to come next. As impatient as the world will be, we have to try to learn to do our jobs as well as we can.
Yeah, I don't doubt the least bit the complexity. It seems almost impossible. So I think that's why there's so much interest and there's so much tied to the kind of cases that you will be taking and the decisions that you will be making. This next question comes to us from Faith. We just have a first name, Faith. She is a media literacy educator. She says, do you see Facebook predominantly as a media company that should be, so therefore should be obligated to act in the public interest, or as a public utility that should be regulated as such, or as a private business that should mostly have autonomy to set policy? And how does that, how does your view affect your assessment of the content? It's a very interesting question that has been much debated, this idea of media company versus public utility. I'm tempted to give this to one of our lawyers, which I think is everyone, but I think just about everybody, but not you, John, right? I don't think you're an attorney.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead. You want to take it?
John?
Yes.
Sure, I'll try. Yeah, this is different parts of the political spectrum have said different things at different times. As an empirical legal matter, we should notice, though, that if it were a media company, it would be regulated by the FCC and under broadcasting law. And it isn't, so it hasn't been recognized that way. It's not recognized as a public utility because it's not owned by the government. The internet itself, while the government contributed to it, isn't owned. And the internet is, in fact, decisions have been made to keep government at a distance. The famous Section 230 of federal law, it does that. I think also the question I would pose, and I think has been somewhat in the background here, if it were a public utility, that would mean that you would have both government and therefore politics involved. And one of the questions that is in the air here, and I won't answer it, but I think it's a proper question to pose, do we really think that given the way our politics is now, the way it's polarized and difficult in so many ways, that government can come up with a consensus that would make something like a public utility work? Or would it become a plaything of a polarized partisanship? And in that sense, not really be very functional, and you would ultimately probably get the courts involved and so on. I know there's a lot of feeling that that should be done. It's certainly not a public utility, and I would pose the question of people thinking very concretely about what that would mean. So I see it as a private business. I see this board in the big picture as an attempt to deal with the problems of status quo or content moderation done by Facebook has people dissatisfied in certain ways. And what's the next alternative is to have a much stronger government role. Doesn't seem like a good idea to me, and I think many others if they think about it. So this is a third way, and it certainly fits with the business model in my view, which is that I think Facebook is a company that takes a long-term view about things, and setting up this independent board is a way to gain some legitimacy for its content moderation. And, you know, as a business matter, its content moderation is essential to the continuation and success of Facebook, because if you don't have content moderation, you can't draw as many people to the platform as you would otherwise. People will be alienated, and you'll find that you're not really meeting your obligations to shareholders to maximize value for them. So I see this as, you know, those other alternatives as really deeply problematic and potentially harmful in many ways. And so we have to see here, this is an alternative. It's within the business model, generally speaking. Although we don't report to Facebook, we're not owned by Facebook, all of that stuff, it's not part of the business. But I think it's an attempt to solve a new answer to a very difficult problem here. And what I would hope is that people give us a chance, right? We live in a world right now where people don't give each other a chance. Trial and error is mostly just, you made an error, stop it. They're going to try to experiment with this thing and see how it works. And I think it can work because I think the people on the board have come here with good faith.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point about it's in Facebook's business interest in order for its to get content moderation right so as not to alienate its core users upon whom its business model is built. That said, I don't think it's the remit of the Oversight Board, of course, to concern itself with Facebook's bottom line, but for the public good. That's why you're.
That's correct. Let me make that very clear, because I was talking in a very general sense why this oversight board. We have nothing to say at all about Facebook's business decisions. All we have to say, we're just appeals court for policies, perhaps, and for all, definitely for the content moderation.
Michael, this one is for you. It's from Stephen Overly from Politico. There was immediate pushback from some conservative lawmakers and advocates who questioned whether their voice was well enough represented and whether this board will institutionalize what they see as online censorship. How do you respond to these criticisms? I'm specifically pointing this question to you, as you are, I don't know if you are self-proclaimed or perceived to be a conservative.
You know, I think an evaluation of the balance of any institution depends on where you're coming from. And of course, people from the conservative side of the spectrum are going to look at this and say, oh my goodness, this certainly looks loaded the other way. People from the progressive side of the spectrum, presumably pretty much the same. What is important for people to realize is that one's views on politics are not the same as one's views on the scope and limits on freedom of expression. We've known this in this country for a very long time, that there have been, you know, some of the greatest champions of, you know, freedom of speech for the left have been conservatives, and for the right have been liberals. And of course, there are limits to freedom of speech. That's what makes it so hard. That's why there are whole courses like the one I teach at Stanford Law School on freedom of speech. But it doesn't have to be divided between red and blue. That this is a commitment to civil liberties can transcend one's politics.
Thank you. Jamal, I'll direct this one to you. This is from Katie Smith in Washington, D.C. She is part of Search for Common Ground. You've mentioned that the global nature of the board. Can you speak to how the board will deal with cultural sensitivity and making rules on specific cases with complex local contexts, and how the board will take measure to ensure context specificity in how those rulings are applied in other places? So this is an excellent question, is that the norms, of course, in different parts of the world are different, and you are taking on, you know, you're trying to bring a global perspective, if there is such a thing.
It is a good question. It's one that the design of the board, in constructing the board in the first place, has been thought about quite a lot. So there's a couple of mechanisms for incorporating some cultural context into our decisions. One is that we'll sit in panels, and any decision, any panel that deals with a particular region will have a representative from that region. Obviously, that's not going to be sufficient to deal with all of the potential nuance within a particular cultural context. We'll also have, we have a staff, a significant staff, that will help to solicit additional information and additional cultural context. That's something that we are able to ask for. That will be part of some cases already. And so we do have ways of getting information. The broader question of how do you apply a global standard to regional issues is a question that has been part of international and regional human rights forever. And it's incorporated into the norms that are part of international human rights systems. So margins of appreciation is the technical term for giving some credence to variation from region to region. And as we make decisions, as we make individual decisions, particular cultural context is going to matter. And set precedent for other cases, just as in the international human rights system, taking particular cultural context into account in future decisions will also be part of the instructions that you give going forward. But this is it's a difficult question, and it's really one of the central questions that I think the board's going to have to deal with and try to arrive at some consensus about.
There's a interesting related question where we were just talking about cultural context. This question is about political context. Evelyn, I'll direct this to you. This is from Thomas Huell. I think I've probably mangled his last name, Tomasz from Prague. I know that much. He is with the European Center for Career Education. He asks, how will the board deal with the issue of political neutrality? Some countries such as China, Russia, Iran, Turkey, Brazil, and Germany might have completely different views of what should be allowed.
Yeah, so maybe I'll look at that question from 2 points of view. You know, our goal as board members is to be as neutral as possible in reviewing Facebook's decisions and to try to look at these decisions from every angle possible. In terms of the views of different countries, we are pegged to international human rights norms, and those have content. And that content, you know, does not allow for stifling political speech, and it does not allow for engaging in discrimination on the basis of political beliefs. So we will have, as part of what we look at, Facebook's community standards, its values, but also we have this commitment to international human rights standards, which I think will help address some of this gentleman's concerns.
I should warn everybody, we have time for just a couple of more questions. This one, Facebook has, this is from an anonymous attendee. Facebook has one set of policies that oversee both political and issue ads and government ads. This makes it confusing for the public to consume information and understand the difference between what is official and what is political. Have you been tasked to provide guidance in this area? John.
We will be tasked. We can make policy recommendations, but Facebook would have to ask us to do so. And obviously, we're just getting started, so they haven't asked us yet.
I'm going to, I think, unfortunately, make this the last one. And while it is, framed as a question, I think it's actually a very interesting idea, again, from an anonymous attendee. I'll direct this one to you, Michael. Will the Oversight Board hold regular public meetings, like the way, for example, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, has monthly open meetings where it makes major decisions and which anyone can attend? Talk about must-see TV.
No. What we will do is issue written decisions in each matter that we consider.
Okay. All right. Well, that was such a quick answer. I'm going to throw in one more bonus question. Here's a good one. Besides your stellar CVs, all of you, what did Facebook ask you before issuing you an invitation to serve on the board? Did they ask you about any particular issues or policy positions? Now, I will say, I know that the chairs were in place before the members, and the chairs were part of selecting the members, I believe. So maybe I will throw this to the members. Evelyn?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if I was asked anything that specific. We, as part of the process, had an interview with an executive search firm. And if I recall, a lot of those questions were about being able to look at issues from different points of view, listening, collegial decision-making, perhaps expertise in particular areas. That's what comes to mind at this point. John, anything else?
Yeah, I would say that's exactly my recollection. But a lot of the questions went to issues of conflict of interest and possible conflicts of interest and your thoughts about that. And so obviously that was a deep concern for Facebook in setting this up. But that that wasn't about positions, but about where you come from or whatever. I don't remember, they don't ask you, there were no questions about politics. There were really all of us have public record about some of these issues and scholarly writing, but nothing beyond that really.
I'm afraid we have to end it here because we promised our guests, they have another session in 5 minutes, so we need to let them go. But I want to say a huge thank you for your candor, your transparency, your clarity of thinking, your answers to the questions. Some of them could have been maybe more, but that's okay. This has been really useful and helpful and illuminating. And I'm sorry to those of you whose questions we did not get to, unfortunately. This session will be available to watch. We'll have it up hopefully tonight, if not latest, first thing tomorrow morning. You can find the link at our Aspen Digital's Twitter account, which is at Aspen Digital. I also want to remind regular viewers of our webinar that we have on Wednesday at 4 o'clock Eastern Time, Where the Sidewalk Ended, the Future of Smart Cities, after the Toronto waterfront. You can go to Aspen Digital's website to learn more. Thank you again to the panelists. I'm so grateful for your time, and to everybody that's been watching. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.